So in the August of 1870, the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition set off with 19 men to explore the geography of Upper Wyoming. And during their 5-week adventure, the team forded rivers and they climbed mountains and they identified and named 7 different geysers. Most hydrothermic features are erratic in nature, but one was very predictable, with an impressive display shooting off over 100 feet in the air on a regular count of about 74 minutes every time. These explorers promoted that the land that they were charting was a vast and beautiful, pristine, uninhabited wilderness. And this became the national park of, anyone? Yellowstone. Well done. And this particular geyser was Old Faithful. How many of you have seen the geyser of Old Faithful? Yeah, historical side note, this beautiful, pristine wilderness was actually not uninhabited as it was promoted. Archaeological evidence suggests that there have been human inhabitants there for the past 11,000 years. And when it was discovered by white people in 1870, the land was collectively owned as the seasonal home for several indigenous tribes of people, from the Shoshone to the Crow to the Niitsitapi people. And when they fast-tracked it to become a national park in 2 years, they lost their ability and their rights for that land. And that is a sermon for another time. What I want to draw our attention to is the name of this well-known geyser, Old Faithful. For enough time, though, earthquakes and other geological anomalies have altered its behavior that it now erupts about every 90 minutes instead. But it is one of the most reliable, consistent, and enduring natural phenomenon. And that is commonly what we mean by the word faithfulness. And I'm trying to think of how many things in my life, or maybe in my house, I will call faithful simply because I've had them for a long time, or they've never let me down, or they continue to perform their function as when I first got them. Are you with me? This could be a watch, or a hammer, or an automobile, or a coffee maker, or a dog. What is in your life that you would label as something faithful? And do we mean the same thing by faithfulness when we use the word as the writers of the Bible did? And that's what we'll be exploring today as we continue our next to last sermon in this series, The Planting Season, where we've been going through the different fruit of the Spirit that Paul lays out in Galatians chapter 5. And we've already covered love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and today we're going to be doing faithfulness. And some of you very studious people might be observing, well, wait a minute, goodness is supposed to happen between kindness and faithfulness. And you are absolutely right. We will get to goodness today, but first we need to start with faithfulness. Well, let's begin with how the Bible uses that word in the context and the passage on the front of your bulletins this morning. The context here is that Jesus is speaking some very direct and poignant words to the religious leaders of the day, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. And always note, please, that Jesus' harshest words are always reserved for the religious leaders who should know God better, not everyday worshipers who need to know God more, and never at people outside of the faith community that don't know God at all. The passage falls in the middle of a longer speech where Jesus gives a total of 7 woes in this chapter, and we are reading the 4th. And something to bear in mind, which is very important to the context of this, is in lots of Jewish writing, they have something called the chiastic structure, kind of like a poem where the first thought and the last thought rhyme in ideas, and then the second and the next to last thought rhyme in ideas. And the middle part is the hinge, is the focus, is the main idea that they're going for, and that is the 4th one that we will be reading together right now. So pay attention to that. You can read the other 7 woes on your own, But see how Jesus links everything that came before and everything that came after it with the passage that we will read now. So in your bulletins, would you read with me together and out loud? Matthew chapter 23, verses 23 to 24. Together and out loud. Woe to you, teachers of and the Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen. Now, it's evident to me in this passage that Jesus is a little angry, and let's explore why. The Pharisees were very devout, and they followed the law of Moses to a T. In Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the people were commanded to tithe 1/10 of their crops to the Lord, which covered literally the seed of the land, grain, the fruit of trees. The text in mind think about it as being proper crops, not garden herbs used to flavor foods. The Pharisees took the basic commandment and they made it a little bigger. They extended it into a new context. And Jesus does not challenge them for their zeal, but he does convey that their spiritual gains for doing so are pointless because they have neglected the more important parts of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. They lost their way and focused on outward, observable feats of piety, not inward transformations of the heart. Does this sort of a thing still happen in our churches today? There are many brands of Christianity out there who are very invested more so in how you look and what you say than what is happening in your heart. There are some brands of Christianity out there who are so focused on you being saved that they don't typically care for the plight of the needy to the same degree. There are versions of Christianity where holding on to the right doctrines and beliefs are paramount and will topple or trump any personal piety or social concern. Are there external standards of holiness Christians have erected to measure personal piety at the expense of the same central themes of justice, mercy, and faithfulness? At any point, have we lost the plot and got distracted by other less important matters of faith? In Jesus' time, everyone was very concerned about being ceremonial clean. And at that time, lest they come in contact with somebody that would make them ceremonial unclean and have to leave the community, they were very concerned about this. So what would happen if you accidentally swallowed a fly or a gnat that lands in your drink? It would accidentally become unclean without knowing it. You automatically became unclean by ingesting a bug, so people would put a linen cloth, something very thin like a cheesecloth, over their drinks and cups so they could drink it through that so they would not accidentally ingest a bug. That is how they strain a gnat. And Jesus does not criticize their zeal, but their faithful intention and holy practice in and of itself, but he does call out their hypocrisy by using a very brilliant and clever hyperbole. For he suggests that the Pharisees worked so hard to strain out the tiniest of the unclean creatures listed in the Bible, and yet they seem to swallow whole the biggest unclean creature in the Bible, the camel. And just to drive the point home, for neglecting justice and mercy and faithfulness, that is what Jesus is trying to say that they have lost. Now, gnats weigh like 1 to 2 milligrams, 0.001 grams. And the average camel weighs 1,100 pounds. The contrast between them is 500 million in the dynamic between them. You would have to ingest 500 million gnats to match the weight of one camel. You get to see why Jesus is saying this is central and important to matters of faith. He is calling out their egregious hypocrisy. The Pharisees had become more intolerant of other people's shortcomings and sins, and they began to lack compassion. The ruling class of wealthy families have gotten tied up in their power and privilege and their appearances while turning a blind eye to the oppression and the exploitation of their people that was going on around them at the boot of Rome on the back of their neck. The Pharisees were obsessing over the tiniest thing of impurity, but tolerating their massive ethical failure. Is that sort of a thing happening now? Is the Christian church today straining out gnats but swallowing camels? And when faced with the onslaught of the daily news, we have to ask, have we at any way lost the plot, or are we at all missing the point? And rather than focus on the unnecessary things that are least important, let's take a closer look at the three central things that Jesus says are essential: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. The things he calls the weightier measurements of a religious life. Notice while we have been focusing on all of the 9 fruits of the Spirit the past several weeks, that in this list, Jesus introduces 2 new concepts not otherwise involved. He introduces justice and mercy. Not that he would disagree with Paul, and not that Paul was forgot to include those things. It's not like, when you go to the grocery store and you forget to get milk because it wasn't on your list when you get home. No, he's introducing something new because those 2 are practices, and yet they are a part of faithfulness. Justice is striving to seek that the wrongs that are committed are made right. Justice ensures that power is held to those, that the powerful are held accountable in a way that is impartial and fair. Justice is raising awareness to inform and to deter future transgressions, and justice sets protections in place to prevent future abuse or neglect. And when I hear the news, I can sense that the world needs a lot of justice right now. And on the other hand, there is mercy. For mercy is an extension of grace. Mercy is withholding condemnation and punishment where it is expected or where it is earned. Mercy is leveraging both compassion and pity for another's suffering or failure. Mercy receives another's misery or spares them from harm. And I look at the news and I can speedily discern that the world right now needs a lot of mercy. Justice and mercy work together in balance. For if you neglect one, you betray the other. What actions do you take in your life to live them out as part of your faith? Where is the line drawn between them and the many complex roles that you play in your life as a parent, as a person of faith, as an employee, as a student, as a leader, and as a citizen of our country? Can you see why Jesus calls them weightier matters of holy and right living? Justice and mercy are a part of a living faith. But faithfulness itself is still an inward yearning for the heart of God. Let's look at faithfulness a little more closely, because faithfulness may be one of the more difficult of the fruit of the Spirit to be able to explain, because we often consider it as a matter of intellectual assent. The Greek word for faith here is the word pistis. Can you say that word with me? Pistis. Okay, pistis is just more than intellectual belief. It's faithfulness in a deep, active trust, a reliance on God and his promises. Pistis also carries with it a secondary understanding that goes with there being an assurance or a guarantee in something. It goes beyond just acknowledging something that in your mind, but goes to a surrender to the person, to their life in God, and in alignment with his values. Faithfulness is something that is not static, but it grows, and it is a part of a relationship that you have with God. It is complete confidence in something or someone. Pistis goes well beyond calling something old faithful by declaring that something is reliable, like we do. Faithfulness is tied to our real-world experience of something. And to use a practical example, many people keep their faith or think of God as an intellectual thing like I would this chair, where we can say that I acknowledge that this chair exists. I know that it is there. I have seen other people have a chair experience. I think that it will support my weight if I were to sit down upon it. If putting our faith in God is like sitting in the chair, that is the thing. Because it isn't faith until we actually sit down and trust that it will sustain us. That is faith. And if our faith in God is like sitting in a chair, sometimes people will walk around it and see if there's any other chairs out there that might be better, that might work for them, might be suitable before they sit down. Some people might come and they might sit down and be, well, I am not going to go do that again. There was something uncomfortable about putting myself out there and putting my trust in something beyond me. Some people just might sidle up next to the chair if putting our faith in God is like sitting in a chair. Or they might lean against it, somehow, but never dare to actually sit. Some people are like, I'm not going to sit in the chair. I am standing in the chair. Look at me, look at me, look at the faith that I have in the chair that I know. And some people will be, I don't even need a chair. I don't need a chair. Where are you when it comes to your faith? Where are you when it comes to knowing, believing, and trusting God? Is it just an intellectual thing that you acknowledge that it is there? Or do you have the real experience of living and sitting in the presence in your faith? Or do you tend to admire it at a distance? Justice, mercy, and faithfulness, these are the weightier matters of living a life of faith. And to extend the chair analogy as a metaphor of justice, what is getting in the way of other people from being able to sit down? Are there blocks? Are there barricades? Is there stuff that is getting in the way that keep people from being able to access the chair? Are there some people who assert that there are people who are not worthy to have a chair? Are there people along this idea that would say, well, yes, you can have your chair, but you need to sit in the back? Justice is removing the barriers that keep people from God. And that is exactly why Jesus chased out the money changers in the temple with the whip. Because in their faith context, people were wanting to sit in the chair, but they had to pay in order to do it. And then there were taxes and fees that were levied on top of it. Let's examine the chair metaphor of faith and looking it through the eyes of mercy. For mercy is saying, whatever you have done in your life, whatever badness there may be, you deserve a chair. Mercy is saying to someone who's had it rough, who's down on their luck, that are struggling, to say, you look tired. Have a seat. Mercy is saying, let me draw up another chair around the table that we can sit together around God's table and taste and see that the Lord is good. And there's our missing fruit, goodness. Goodness and faithfulness are often tied together throughout the Bible, and also how we speak about it. We talk about doing something in good faith if we want to promise to do something, we don't have collateral to back it up at that moment. But we need to understand this distinction about goodness, is that goodness is always defined by God as the measure. And we get this from passages like Mark 10:18, when a man comes to Jesus and says, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone." For something to carry the value of goodness, it stems from a religious framework. And there are challenges to philosophical attempts to try to define something as good without God in it. The word Paul uses here for this fruit of the Spirit is agathos, which means to be morally honorable and pleasing to God and therefore beneficial. And we may get this word several times put together in the New Testament, where we see agathos and pistis together, like Matthew 25. And in that is the parable of the talents. And then in that parable, the master goes off on a journey and he gives money to his servants behind him to invest while he is gone. And when he comes back, they give an account for what they did with what was granted them. And they say, "Master, you have entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. And his master replies, "Well done, good and faithful servant. I have trusted you with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." And that exact same phrase is repeated again 2 verses later when the second of those servants come and have doubled the investment that their master gave them. But if you know the story, when it comes to the third slave, he just went and put the money in the ground and didn't do anything with it. And the master calls him something very short and perhaps the opposite of good and faithful. He calls him evil and lazy. And some translations say wicked and reluctant. And I find that reluctance to be very powerful in this context because he didn't even try. The master entrusted him to do the work while he was gone, and he just didn't do it. And we usually hear and view this parable in the context of how we invest our money, but I'd like us just to look at this story in the context of obedience. Are we doing the things the master has asked us to do until he returns? Are we, as a community of faith, leveraging our faithfulness to bring about justice and mercy? Or are we passively coasting and hoping that someone else will do it instead? And that is the challenge for this week, is to do something intentional to lighten the load of someone else who is having trouble getting along. And this is more than just offering someone to get a refill while you watch the big game this afternoon. God may be asking more of us than that, more than just letting the other people at a 4-way stop go first. Acts of justice and mercy take a little bit more intention. They expect a little bit more commitment and require a little bolder resolve, but they may attain a lasting impact over the course of a life. Lighten the load of someone else in need this week. Offer someone a chair at the table who does not yet have a seat. And if you are specifically looking for a way to live this out or to help others, please speak with me after the service, for we are in great need of servants that can deliver food boxes to our elementary school students and families who are in need once a quarter on a Saturday morning. Second, to leveraging your faithful response to the works of justice and mercy. If putting our faith in God is like sitting in a chair, then this week, take a seat. Be grounded, empty-handed, feet to the ground, heart open, and sit in the presence of God. And wait, and invite God into your life and into your space. May that be so for us. May the work that we do in faith, in mercy, and justice be good and morally honorable, pleasing to God and beneficial to the kingdom. May we not get sidetracked or sidelined or sidestepped by unimportant matters of faith. May we not get distracted or deluged or deluded by the maniacal minutia of many meandering manifestations of matters that cause us to swallow gnats and camels. As a church, may we be focused and not neglect the weightier matters of faith, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And may we find a chair to sit in the presence of God. And may we tear down any obstacle or barricade that keeps other people from doing the same. And offer anyone who looks tired, worn, lost, or marginalized a seat at the table of God's grace. That we may hear the King say to us, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Will you pray with me?